Two questions to the Secretary of State for the Home Department, Paul Waugh.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the Government is increasing funding for the National Crime Agency by £58 million next year, with £150 million over the next 2 years for the Border Security Command to tackle organised immigration crime. And the whole House will welcome the recent action by the National Crime Agency to arrest major suspects in people smuggler gangs.
I applaud the work of the Border Security Command and the NCA in those operations. Will the Home Secretary join me in thanking Greater Manchester Police for their work in tackling organised crime groups, particularly the notorious Adam OCG in Rochdale, whose drug dealing, whose modern slavery and whose child exploitation make life such a misery for my residents? And will she particularly applaud the work of Chief Superintendent Danny Inglis and his team, not just for their superb detective work, but also their engagement with schools?
Well, I will join my honourable friend in congratulating Greater Manchester Police and also the National Crime Agency on this operation, which will have made people safer on the streets of Rochdale. Tackling organised drug crime means action stretching from the NCA, working internationally, but also right through to neighbourhood police on the streets and community work to prevent young people being drawn into organised gangs.
Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary will know that rural areas are not immune to county lines activity, which he'd like to put on record with thanks to the excellent work of West Mercia Police, who recently arrested quite a few people on drugs-related and firearms charges. But what more can the National Crime Agency, and in particular the Multi-Agency Coordination Centre, do to support rural forces and smaller forces like West Mercia?
Well, I would certainly welcome the work that's been done to tackle some of those gangs that he refers to, and these kinds of crimes have a huge impact on communities. We do need the National Crime Agency working not just through the regional organised crime units, but also with local forces, right through to the neighbourhood police on the beat, because that's often where the intelligence comes from, especially where children are being dragged in.
Minister McKenna.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know the Home Secretary understands the importance of our brave firearms officers in dealing with serious and organised crime when they pose a danger to the public. I welcome the measures to provide anonymity. However, will they consider going further by allowing a defence to misconduct or criminal proceedings if an officer can show they followed their training and procedure?
Well, the honourable member will know we set out very swiftly the response to the anonymity review, including the accountability review, including a series of measures, including on accountability, but also on strengthening the law and strengthening the way in which the system needs to work much more speedily to support officers in very difficult split-second decisions. We have currently a review underway involving Tim Godwin and Sir Adrian Fulford that is looking at many of these issues.
Becky, Gittins. Sorry.
Question 2, please, Mr Speaker.
Secretary.
Mr Speaker, with permission, I will group this question with questions 6 and 23. Too many town centres and high streets have been hit in recent years by soaring shoplifting and street crime and damaging antisocial behaviour at the same time as neighbourhood police have been heavily cut. This government is introducing new powers to tackle antisocial behaviour and shop crime and rebuilding neighbourhood police on our streets.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for her response. Too often in recent years, we have seen antisocial behaviour blight our high streets, with people in Clwyd East feeling unsafe when out in their local community. We know that neighbourhood policing works. In Prestatyn, North Wales Police's recent work to combat antisocial behaviour at the retail centre has led to both positive youth engagement and criminal charges. Does she agree with me that rather than write off these types of offences as low level and leave communities to deal with them alone, as the previous government have done, we need to prioritise neighbourhood policing and give officers the powers that they need to tackle antisocial behaviour head-on?
My right honourable friend is exactly right. I congratulate her for standing up for her town centre, because when town centre crime gets out of control, that impacts on local businesses, local confidence and badly on communities. That is why we are bringing in respect orders that can ban repeat perpetrators from town centres, and also setting out our plans for 13,000 more neighbourhood police and PCSOs back on our streets.
McKenna.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Your question. May I thank my honourable friend for her answer? That was very helpful. Many residents in my constituency flag up the real problems with antisocial behaviour in the town centres, in Sheerness and in Sittingbourne. We're getting smashed windows in church halls, in the shops when the Christmas lights were being put on. And I'm seeing it all the time. Oh, sorry, Mr. Speaker. Can my honourable friend please tell me what help she's offering Kent Police to support my residents with this?
Yeah. Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and as well as our plans to increase neighbourhood policing and also to have introduced respect orders, we are also going to get rid of the ludicrous £200 rule that we inherited from the Conservatives, which means that shoplifting is very often not being properly investigated, and it needs to be taken much more seriously.
Beales.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had the pleasure of meeting Sonny, the new store manager at the Hotel Chocolat in Uxbridge, which was opening today. Unfortunately, during this joyous occasion, he told me about all too familiar stories of shoplifting and antisocial behaviour which blight our high streets. With 19% of the Met's police time taken for London-wide and national policing issues, can the Minister assure me that this issue will be taken into account when allocating the Met's budget, so we have the resources we need and, crucially, the police we need back on our high streets?
Yeah.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and I can tell him we have already provided the Met Police with an additional £37 million this year in order to fund the police pay increase that was not funded by the previous Conservative government. And we are also supporting neighbourhood policing right across the country, and the much stronger action, not just on shop theft, but also on assaults against shop workers, which are a truly disgraceful crime.
Snowden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a former Police and Crime Commissioner for Lancashire, I worked very closely with the last government on Operation Centurion, which was about focusing really in on antisocial behaviour through more visible patrols and through better partnership working. However, we know that a lot of antisocial behaviour is egged on by a very small minority, and indeed, actually, some of the most serious crimes around antisocial behaviour are driven by that small minority. And without restricting freedoms, the banning orders don't work, engagement with youth offending teams don't work because they're all voluntary. So what measures does the government intend to bring in as part of their new zero tolerance zones that will be different to what currently is to make it really zero tolerance?
Well, the honourable member is right that sometimes this can be a small minority who are making life a total nightmare for everyone else. The current antisocial behaviour injunctions just aren't strong enough because very often they don't come with a power of arrest. That is why we're introducing the respect orders, which means that repeat perpetrators can be banned from town centres and will have a power of arrest so that swift action can be taken if they're breached.
Brown Fuller.
Mr. Speaker, antisocial behaviour and crime on our high streets is best tackled with a visible police presence. But in my constituency of Chichester, my police officers are spending a 4-hour round trip taking those that they're arresting to Worthing Custody Centre when we have a perfectly fit-for-purpose custody centre in Chichester. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that opening Chichester Custody Centre would reduce time that police officers are sat in traffic and get them back on our streets?
Yeah. Well, the honourable member makes an important point that there are obviously additional challenges often for rural areas or areas where neighbourhood policing have to travel, and it's important that we maintain and increase neighbourhood policing right across the board in all areas. She will know that many of the issues around the locations of centres are matters for the operational decisions for police forces, but I will pass the issue she's raised on to her Police and Crime Commissioner.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cherry Tree Centre on the Swinemore estate in Beverley provides support for up to 150 young people in the area, and that's despite the fact they don't have any permanent premises. They have planning permission. They've had some money from the National Lottery. But could I please meet with the Right Honourable Lady or one of her colleagues to discuss how we could find the funding to make sure that we get the right premises in place to support young people on Swinemore and across Beverley?
I will happily ensure that the honourable member is able to have a meeting with one of the team. We do believe that introducing youth hubs is part of the prevention work that we need, part of new prevention partnerships, particularly to prevent young people being drawn into crime. We also need a new, stronger law on child criminal exploitation.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The use of illegal, high-powered, Sauron-type e-bikes by criminal gangs on and around our high streets is causing significant concern, particularly across London, with incidents of antisocial behaviour, violent muggings and phone theft becoming increasingly more common. Can the Minister please update the House on discussions that her department has had with the Mayor of London and the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police on what they're doing to reduce these incidents and make our streets safer across London?
Well, I think the honourable member is right to refer to there are issues around antisocial and criminal use, not just of e-bikes, but sometimes we've seen issues around e-scooters being used illegally on pavements, also off-road bikes as well, used to cause havoc in local neighbourhoods. And that is why we are going to be strengthening the law around vehicles that are used for antisocial behaviour so that they can be seized when that antisocial behaviour takes place and the police don't have to go through a whole ritual of series of warnings, which means that the action is delayed.
Barker.
Number 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the horrendous attack at Forbury Gardens in Reading claimed the lives of 3 people, and it is all the more agonising for their loved ones that the subsequent inquest concluded that it was avoidable. The Home Secretary and I are overseeing the implementation of commitments made in response to the inquest, and we are determined that all the lessons learned from this terrible incident are acted upon.
Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response. James Fairlong, David Wales and Joe Ritchie Bennett were murdered in the Forbury Gardens terrorist attack in Reading in 2020. The Judge Coroner found major problems with intelligence sharing between authorities. This was underlined in the Prevention of Future Deaths report published back in May. Gary Fairlong, my constituent and father of James, alongside others, are demanding that this is not just another report that sits on a shelf gathering dust. So what action is my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, going to make in terms of permanent changes on the back of this? And will she agree to meet with me and Gary Fairlong to discuss progress in due course?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this very important issue? Our deepest condolences are with the loved ones of James, Joseph and David following their tragic deaths. I can assure the honourable lady and the families that we will do everything within our power to stop this from happening again. We will, of course, be happy to meet the families to discuss changes made, and, of course, I'd be happy to meet the honourable lady and her constituent to discuss this matter further.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Fylde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House will be with the families of the Reading victims and the victims of other terror attacks. Mr. Speaker, Jonathan Hall KC, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, has said that as much information as possible should be put into the public domain as early as possible to maintain public trust. Can the Minister assure the House that he and his ministerial colleagues have always disclosed relevant information at an early stage in relation to high-profile terror-related cases which have attracted substantial public and media attention?
Can I thank Shadow Home Secretary? I think he's raised an important issue, and yes, we agree with Jonathan Hall. He's absolutely right. Our overriding priority will always be to ensure that the victims of crime get justice, and we will look at how best that can be achieved.
Chris MacDonald.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will group this response with questions 19 and 22. In the last year of the previous government, shop theft reached a record high, and we saw intolerable levels of abuse against shop workers, leaving people fearful to go to work. This government will not stand by as these crimes devastate our high streets and town centres. That's why we are committed to rebuilding neighbourhood policing, to scrapping the £200 limit, which has let thieves steal below the level with impunity, and introduce a new standalone offence of assaulting a retail worker.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Our shop workers will be putting in some long, hard shifts in the coming weeks to help us get ready for Christmas. But a report from the Usdaw Trade Union has said that their risk of being a victim of assault in the workplace has doubled in the last year. Will my honourable friend, the Minister, join me in commending Usdaw's Freedom from Fear campaign and also affirm that the Government's commitment to removing the immunity from certain types of shoplifting introduced by the Conservative Government will proceed at pace?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for highlighting Usdaw's findings and also for their tireless campaigning alongside the Co-op for this new standalone offence for assaulting a retail worker, which we will be proud to introduce in the forthcoming Crime and Policing Bill, alongside the scrapping of the £200 limit. And I also just want to take this opportunity to recognise the commitment of Cleveland's Police and Crime Commissioner, Matt Story, in tackling retail crime, and I look forward to working with all Police and Crime Commissioners to tackle this scourge on our communities.
Tim Rutland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Shoplifting is a crime that threatens the feeling of safety for both shoppers and shop workers alike. And in my constituency of East Worthing and Shoreham, the issue has become so severe that in the last year a resident described it as an epidemic. So can my right honourable friend please tell me how the government plans to tackle this issue so that shoppers and businesses in my area can operate in safety and with confidence?
Yay. And my honourable friend is absolutely right that people in East Worthing and Shoreham and across all of the country want to know how this government is going to tackle this epidemic. And again, setting out the 13,000 neighbourhood police officers, respect orders, the £200 threshold limit being abolished, and the standalone offence around assaults on shop workers. I want to restore confidence for the people that my honourable friend represents, that will make them feel that their streets are safer and ensure that criminals in their area pay the price for their crimes.
Chris Ward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituency team and I recently visited shops on one of the busiest high streets in my constituency. The first 10 we visited, 9 said they suffered attacks at work, and all 10 said that shoplifting was now pretty much a daily occurrence. Does the Minister agree that extra resource and extra policing is part of the answer here? But should we also be looking at schemes like offender to rehab schemes, such as the one rolled out in the West Midlands, to also make sure we're tackling the causes of retail crime?
I think my honourable friend paints a deeply upsetting and absolutely unacceptable picture of the impact of this type of aggressive and repeated shop theft that it can have on retail workers. And the worst thing is we know this is replicated up and down the entire country. So we can't continue like this, and that's why we're determined to take the action that I've set out in previous answers. But I do agree that we have to look at issues around rehabilitation for offenders, including the treatment for addiction, where it is appropriate for that to happen.
Bath is a very popular tourist and shopping destination, but Bath has also seen the highest increase in shoplifting offences between 2023 and 24. For my shopkeepers to feel safe, they want a much more visible police presence in Bath. What can the government do for that?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Shop theft went up 29% in the previous year. Totally unacceptable, and I hear very clearly what she says about her own constituency of Bath. That's why the neighbourhood policing model that this Labour government stood on in the general election is so important, indeed starting to tackle and deal with the shop theft, which has become this epidemic that we've just been talking about.
For the best objective.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary has repeatedly reiterated her pledge to tackle shoplifting and violence against shop workers by having a named officer in each community as part of the 13,000 uplift for neighbourhood policing. I spoke to Cambridgeshire Constabulary recently, who confirmed that under her plans in the town of St Ives there would be one police officer to cover the whole town. That same officer would not only cover the town of St Ives, but also the towns of Ramsey and all the villages in between: Woodhurst, Oldhurst, Pidley, Warboys, Wistow and Bury. Last week, the policing minister wouldn't commit to reviewing the police allocation formula that would see Cambridgeshire receive its fair share of funding. So how can one officer be expected to cover such a large area effectively, given we will likely receive a handful of the officers?
Can I just say gently to the honourable member that he has to look back at what this government has inherited from his Conservative government over 14 years, where neighbourhood policing was cut and cut and cut. This government is committed to restoring neighbourhood policing. We've said that we will bring in 13,000 police officers, PCSOs and specials to actually... Well, the Shadow Home Secretary is shouting at me when. We are working on this as quickly as we can, 5 months in, after 14 years of what they did to our policing.
James Wild. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shoplifting is often organised by criminal gangs, and Norfolk Police has had some success in fighting them. And will the Minister recognise that partnerships such as Operation Wonderland, just launched by West Norfolk Police with the local council and CCTV operators, street rangers, as well as shop workers, are key to tackling this crime and making sure offenders are brought to justice?
I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point. Policing alone cannot deal with this, and we need to work hand in hand with businesses, with the trade unions. Usdaw have been very important in the campaign around the offence that we're going to bring in around assaulting shop workers. I also have met with the British Retail Consortium, and I'm going to be chairing a regular forum with the retail sector to make sure that we're sharing best practice and we're going to deal with the problems that we've inherited.
Shadow Minister Mark Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the best ways to help tackle retail crime is to put more police on the streets. The last Conservative government did just that. The last Conservative government did just that, delivering record numbers of police with more funding than ever before. But we weren't stopping there. This year, the Conservative government increased frontline police funding by £922 million. Will the Minister commit to matching or even improving that figure next year?
I do think that the Shadow Minister needs to reflect. I don't know if it's just amnesia on that side of the House, but what we've actually inherited. PCSOs cut by 50%, specials down by 2/3. Over 20,000 police officers cut under the Conservative administration. So I think a little bit of humility about what they've left us with would go very well.
Right, Wendy Chamberlain.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we are determined to honour our commitment to those who supported us in Afghanistan and who stood up for freedom and democracy, placing their own lives at risk. To date, the Afghan schemes have brought over 32,000 people to safety in the UK. This includes thousands through the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme. We aim to continue to relocate eligible individuals through our established schemes as quickly as possible.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A major issue of concern for Afghans who have been here since the opening of the scheme is that their residency permits are now up for renewal. And now I'm sure the Government doesn't want to render those who we welcome to the UK as illegal, but can we get some guidance from the Home Office to some of the questions that have been raised for me? Where do people go for renewal? How are the Home Office responding to those who've had several changes of address? And if there is a cost, what happens to those who cannot pay?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, indeed for all the work that she does in relation to those who are here from Afghanistan. We do continue to seek to email and notify all those individuals who are currently resettled in the UK that we are aware of, and I will certainly continue to discuss with her the methods we are using for those who are facing other issues.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Dr Lubna Hadura, is an NHS consultant who desperately wants to be able to care for her 80-year-old mother, a refugee displaced from Gaza earlier this year. She is now alone in Egypt and unable to care for herself. Will the Minister assure me that her application for an adult dependent relative visa will be carefully, humanely and properly considered?
We actually match the resettlement. Okay.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. The death and destruction in Gaza is intolerable, and I can assure her that the application that she is referring to is being looked at very closely, and she should be receiving an update very soon.
Got settled.
Number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody? Minister.
Apologies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the government has set out an unprecedented mission to halve violence against women and girls within a decade. I say this on White Ribbon Day. It's good to see everybody wearing their white ribbons. And we are determined to tackle the scourge of domestic abuse in all of its forms. From early 2025, Raneem's law putting domestic abuse specialist teams embedded into 999 control rooms to improve the police response to domestic abuse crimes, ensuring that victims get a swift and specialist response when they call for help. We are also going to finally launch the pilots of the domestic abuse protection orders and roll them out across the country, which the previous government failed to do 3 years after the fact of the law changing. So we will be providing stronger protections for survivors and ensuring that perpetrators are properly monitored and managed.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Minister for her response. My constituent Samantha Billingham is a domestic abuse survivor who now runs training sessions on coercive control. Coercive control is a thread that runs throughout all abuse, and I was shocked to hear that it does not form a core part of the training for the police, social workers or any other domestic violence training. Will the Minister meet with me and Samantha to ensure that coercive control forms a key part of domestic violence training going forward?
Thank you. I have actually, Mr. Speaker and the whole House, met Samantha Billingham a number of times as a local West Midlands legend campaigning in this particular space, and I share my honourable friend's shock at the lack of knowledge about coercive control. All police, social workers and others in contact with victims of domestic abuse ought to be aware of coercive control and its insidious effects on the victim, and of course I would be delighted to meet her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a significant disparity in sentencing for murder based on whether a weapon was taken to the scene of a domestic crime or was already present. Murderers who used a weapon already available at the crime scene have a starting sentence 10 years lower than those who brought a weapon with them. Does the Minister agree with me that this disparity must be tackled?
I thank the Honourable Lady and would like to pay tribute to Julie Davey and Carol Gould, who are two of the parents who fight this campaign very hard. There is a sentencing review currently ongoing by the Ministry of Justice, and I know that Carol and Julie and members here will want to feed into that.
Alice MacDonald.
Number 8, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
The epidemic of knife crime that has grown over the last decade is devastating families and communities right across the country, and that's why this government has set an unprecedented mission to halve knife crime over the next 10 years. We are already taking action to get lethal blades off Britain's streets and take stronger action against illegal online knife sales. We're also determined to stop young people being drawn into violent crime and county lines in the first place, which is why we're delivering a radical new Young Futures prevention programme with targeted interventions to help at-risk young people and a network of new youth hubs.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for meeting with me recently? As she says, too many young people are being drawn into county lines suffering exploitation and violence. This is a significant problem across the country, including in Norwich. Many organisations are working hard locally to improve this situation, like the Joe Dix Foundation, established by his parents after Joe's tragic murder in 2022. Can the Minister reassure me that the government is doing all it can to invest in preventative measures and set out what is being done to support organisations on the front line?
It was a great pleasure to meet my honourable friend just last week to discuss this issue, and organisations like the Joe Dix Foundation do amazing work to help keep people safe, keep young people out of county line gangs in particular. And through the Home Office's County Lines programme, we are going after exploitative gangs and providing specialist support for children and young people. And our Young Futures programme will establish those prevention partnerships in every local authority to identify children and young people at risk.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister speaks of the Young Futures programme. Can she work with the Northern Ireland Executive to put in place the same programmes that we can prevent actually young people in Northern Ireland joining paramilitary organisations, which are nothing more than organised crime and violent crime organisations?
Well, I can certainly talk to the Minister in the Northern Irish office to discuss what we can learn from the programme that we will be putting forward, and the good practice we know exists already in many parts of the UK. We want to build on that, so I'm very happy to share that.
Dr. Maria-Tibble.
Number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Like buses, aren't they? They all come along at once. I want to thank my honourable friend for the important question, because I know vehicle theft is a deeply distressing and damaging crime which can have a detrimental effect on both individuals and businesses, including in rural communities. And that's why we're working closely with both the police and the automotive industry to ensure the most robust responses possible to these crimes. And last week I met with the National Police Chiefs Council lead for vehicle crime to discuss this very issue and how we can better work together to prevent it.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. An increase in car and van thefts, along with antisocial behaviour in Stockbridge, Deepcar, High Green, Chapeltown and Dodworth, has left my constituents feeling vulnerable and unsafe. Local people have also experienced excessive 999 response times. Can the Minister outline how she is tackling the rise in vehicle thefts, working with manufacturers to improve vehicle safety and supporting South Yorkshire Police after years of Conservative cuts?
Well, again, I'm very pleased that this question is being asked, and it's important to note that this autumn, driven by the National Police Chiefs Council lead for vehicle crime, the National Vehicle Crime Reduction Partnership has been launched, bringing together the Police, Home Office and manufacturers on this very point of how we tackle this problem. We're also committed to bringing forward legislation to ban electronic devices used to steal vehicles, empowering the police and courts to target those criminals using manufacturing and supplying them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was a very welcome answer from the Minister. Farmers in Wiltshire complain not just about car theft, which is endemic, but wider agricultural theft as well, and the terrible scourge of hare coursing. It's all bound up in a very serious organised crime business. Does the Minister recognise the seriousness of organised rural crime of this nature, and what steps is she taking to address it?
Yes, I think the Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point, and I recently met with the Agricultural Engineers Association to discuss the implementation of the Equipment Theft Prevention Act 2023, which the Honourable Gentleman will know it's really important in terms of tackling some of that rural crime in terms of agricultural equipment that has been stolen, often by organised gangs. So there is work ongoing on this, and it is recognised by the Home Office.
Richard.
10, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, public confidence in policing fell under the last Conservative government as we saw a big drop in police on the beat, with fewer crimes solved and a real sense in communities that more criminals are getting away with it. This government is determined to turn that round, starting with getting police back on the beat and rebuilding neighbourhood policing.
Speaker, earlier this month I held a community meeting in Dinnington about the regeneration project on the High Street. It was well attended and people are really optimistic, but they are also worried about the lack of police in the area and the crime that continues to blight their town. So can the Home Secretary reassure the residents of Dinnington that this government will rebuild community policing, which has been utterly let down over the 14 years of Conservative government?
My honourable friend is exactly right, because the percentage of people seeing the police on the beat each week has dropped by 2/3 over the last 14 years. The percentage of people who say they never see the police has doubled, and that is the shameful consequence of 14 years of Conservative policing policies. This government will put 13,000 more police and PCSOs back on the beat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local volunteers in Potters Bar were left struggling on Remembrance Sunday to stop the traffic to allow the march to take place. They were told by the police that they lacked both the resources and the power to stop the traffic, and yet on the same day in neighbouring Essex the police managed to visit a journalist regarding a deleted tweet, and every weekend vast amounts of resources pour into London for pro-Palestinian marches. Will the Home Secretary share the despair of my constituents at this allocation of resources and provide guidance for next year's Remembrance Service, both on police powers and responsibilities regarding those marches?
Well, I would just point out to the former Deputy Prime Minister that the state of policing in this country is the policing that we have inherited after 14 years of Conservative government, in which they took police off the beat, where we lost neighbourhood policing and PCSOs. This government has made clear what the priorities for policing should be. Neighbourhood policing, including tackling antisocial behaviour and town centre crime, and reducing serious violence, including knife crime and violence against women and girls. And we always believe that the Remembrance Day should be respected, something one of his former colleagues as Home Secretary did not respect.
Acting Shadow Minister Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 13,000 non-crime hate incidents have been logged by UK police forces in the past year, including against school children as young as 9 for classroom insults. This is estimated to have taken 60,000 hours of police time and undermines public trust and confidence in policing. The last government tightened the guidance, and it has been widely reported this morning that the Home Secretary will update it again. Mr. Speaker, how will the Right Honourable Lady know if her changes have worked? What is the metric, and is there a target? And if they do not work, will she restrict investigations to take place only when there is an imminent risk of an actual crime?
Well, can I welcome the honourable member to her acting role? I'm not sure how long she is acting for, but I welcome her to her role. What I would say to the honourable member is that we have made clear what we believe the priorities for policing should be. It should be neighbourhood policing, it should be reducing serious violence on our streets, and that should be the case across the board. And we should have a common sense approach to policing decisions in every area across the country. The Inspectorate has done a recent report onto the issues that she's raised. It found inconsistencies in a whole series of areas, and we believe that those recommendations need to be taken immensely seriously by forces across the country.
Very pointed.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing more important for this government than keeping our children safe, and that is why I am appalled by the volume of child abuse that is proliferating online, and why we are determined to act. We are committed to the robust implementation of the Online Safety Act, which does contain strong protections for children, but we will not hesitate to go further if tech companies fail to play their part. And our investment in the NCA and GCHQ, an undercover online network of police officers, and the Tackling Organised Exploitation programme is supporting our efforts to keep children safe online by targeting and stopping the highest harm and most technically sophisticated offenders.
Gregor Pointer.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and I greatly welcome the action the Government is taking on this issue. But the fight against child sex abuse online is only as strong as its weakest link, and Facebook's decision to allow the encrypted sharing of images makes them a very weak link indeed. Does the Minister share my concern, in fact my anger, that Facebook appear to be turning a blind eye while their platform becomes a safe haven for paedophiles?
My honourable friend raises an extremely serious issue, and I can assure him that we very much share his concerns. The Home Secretary has met with representatives from Meta, and our officials are in regular contact. And what we say in all these discussions is very simple. For years, Meta has been an industry leader when it comes to preventing and detecting child sex abuse online. And what we all want to see is them continuing to play that positive role, and not, as my honourable friend fears, going in the opposite direction.
Neil Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent lost his son to suicide following exposure to an online suicide forum. He's sadly one of 88 known Britons whose deaths have been linked to this one site, the youngest of whom is just 17. Under the Online Safety Act, the Technology Secretary does have the powers to include these sorts of very small but very dangerous sites under Category 1, the most heavily regulated category, but Ofcom have advised him against doing so. Will the Minister press her colleagues in DSIT to include these exceptionally dangerous sites in Category 1?
Yeah. I pay tribute to her constituent. It is unimaginable for any parent to have to go through something like that. And what I would say is we at the Home Office work incredibly closely with our DSIT colleagues as the Online Safety Bill comes into force to make sure that it is as strong and robust as it can be. And we are having these conversations daily.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Question 12, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Minister.
Still me. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will group this question with questions 18 and 20. The scale of violence against women and girls in our country is intolerable, and this government will treat it as a national emergency. As part of this mission, we are bringing together ministers from right across government, so every department does their bit, from prevention work in schools through to relentless pursuit of dangerous perpetrators. On top of that work, we have already begun on strengthening the police response to domestic abuse. We will mark the next 16 days of activism with further announcements on our work to tackle spiking, stalking and other war crimes.
Thank you to the Minister for that answer. Charities like Aylesbury Women's Aid do brilliant and vital work to support survivors of domestic abuse. However, when these survivors interact with other public-facing services, such as emergency or healthcare services, they're not always met with the same level of understanding. What measures is the Minister taking to ensure that across all public services, survivors of domestic violence and abuse are met with a trauma-informed approach?
I thank my honourable friend, and also a massive thank you to Aylesbury Women's Aid for the amazing work that they are clearly doing. I'm afraid that she is exactly right, and they are right in their assessment, and that is why the government has to have a completely cross-government approach to ensuring that all services, no matter where a victim stands up, are taking responsibility for their role in the lives of those who are suffering.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the honourable member for Stourbridge has pointed out, coercive control is a criminal offence but is often overlooked, despite research suggesting it is the third highest risk factor in domestic homicide. In my surgeries in East Walton, victims have told me there is not sufficient understanding of it in police interviews, particularly when other crimes are being investigated. So can I ask the Minister what assessments are being made of the effectiveness of the rollout of the Domestic Abuse Risk Assessment DARA Toolkit, which was introduced by the College of Peace in 2022?
I thank the honourable lady, and there is a number of different risk assessment tools used, whether that's DARA or the DASH risk assessment, which has a more sort of historical grounding and is used more widely. What I want her to know is that you cannot read any domestic homicide review in our country for the last decade and not think that risk assessments and how well they are used and how well they are operating is something that we should be looking at.
Chris Bloor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the Minister for her answer. Will the Minister join me in thanking the incredible staff at the Sandycroft Centre in my constituency, who offer life-saving support for vulnerable people in times of crisis? And will the Minister agree to visit the centre with me to hear from CEO Lee McKenzie and the independent sexual violence advisors who are on the front line in tackling increased violence against women and girls?
I thank my honourable friend, and as somebody very local to me, I take a particular interest in the centre like the one he mentions, as they are invaluable to vulnerable women, and I would be absolutely delighted because it would take a 15-minute drive to come and visit him and Lee.
Does the Minister agree with me that local charities like Jasmine House that operate in my constituency of Leicester South, that play a vital role in supporting women who have been victims of sexual crime, play a vital role, but in addition to the worry that they have had of constantly trying to find funding, they are now concerned about the impact the government's proposed increase in employers' national insurance will have on their ability to continue providing this help. Does the Minister agree that they should be exempt from the changes to the national insurance contributions?
I thank the honourable gentleman and pay tribute to the Jasmine Centre, I believe it was that he said. And as somebody who applied for funding for a similar centre myself, I can understand exactly the kind of funding pressures that they will be facing. What the sector really needs is stability and insurance of more than single-year funding, which is something that the government is absolutely looking at and making sure that we mitigate to make sure that there is enough.
Let's come to topicals. Dear Costa.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, and it marks the start of 16 days of global activism on the issue. As part of the Labour government's Safer Streets mission, we have set an ambition to halve violence against women and girls, which I hope everyone will be a part of. And today, we are setting out new action to tackle the devastating crime of spiking, with a new standalone criminal offence to strengthen the police response, new specialist training for bar and door staff across the country, and new recording measures because we fear that the prevalence is much higher than has been previously thought, and the dangerous criminals responsible need to be stopped and caught. As we look forward to the festive season, everyone should be able to enjoy a night out without having to worry about the safety of their drink and whether they will be able to get safely home.
Mr. Speaker, I met with constituents in Southall Green at my coffee morning on Friday, and they raised with me the constant issue of open drug dealing and antisocial behaviour in the town centre. Will the Secretary of State work with the Mayor of London to ensure we get more police onto the streets of London and the streets of Southall as soon as we possibly can?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. We have already given the Met an additional £37 million this year on top of what they had been previously allocated. And we also need to make sure that here right across the country we have the neighbourhood police back in town centres, because that is how you tackle not just local drug dealing but also some of the antisocial behaviour and other crimes that blight communities.
Home Secretary Criswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let me start by offering the Home Secretary a belated congratulations on her appointment. Having been a minister in that department, I know how difficult her job is, and I genuinely wish her well in doing it. We will always seek to work constructively with the government in the national interest. I also associate myself with the remarks she made about International Waugh Day. Mr. Speaker, since the election, 19,988 people have dangerously and illegally crossed the Channel, a 23% increase on the same period last year. Why does she think the numbers have gone up so much on her watch?
Well, I thank the Shadow Home Secretary for his opening words. I think he described his time in the Home Office as his best ministerial job ever, which, given that he was the Chief Secretary under Liz Truss, you can perhaps wonder why, Mr. Speaker. He was the Immigration Minister who, I might remind him, told the Commons and the Select Committee that he wouldn't rule out using giant wave machines as the way to stop small boat crossings. Mr. Speaker, we inherited record high levels of small boat crossings in the first half of this year. We have taken action to fix their chaos.
I'm asking the Home Secretary about her record. I'm asking the Home Secretary about why small boat crossings have gone up during her time in office. Perhaps it's because, as the National Crime Agency said, we need a deterrent. Yet she cancelled the Rwanda deterrent before it even started. And now we hear Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, asking European member states to look at offshore processing. Isn't that the reason why it's gone up? And isn't that the reason why the immigration minister sat over there is admitted last week she is opening up new hotels instead of closing them down?
Mr. Speaker, seriously, what a lot of chaos. Highest level on record was the last 6 months of the last Conservative government while he was in government, and in fact the numbers since the summer are not the highest on record. That unfortunately was his legacy, and while he was the immigration minister, he increased the number of asylum hotels 500% and increased the number of people in asylum hotels by over 900%. So seriously, he should not try and give lectures to anybody else at all.
Well, I'm going to do a little lecture. If you really want this attack at each other, can you do it before we get to topicals? They're meant to be short and sweet because other members won't get in. And Lee Smidsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Specialist domestic abuse services like the First Step in Knowsley are facing an increase in demand, but are having to turn people away due to a lack of funding. Can the Minister tell me what more they can do to support services like this?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and to say that I have visited First Steps and to say that it is run by brilliant Merseyside women would be an underestimation. Specialist buy and force services are an essential part of this and provide tailored support to victims and survivors. We understand that challenges that the sector faces, particularly with the level of demand that their services are currently facing, all decisions on funding after March 2025 are subject to the spending review process.
Democrat spokesperson Luke Taylor.
Thank you. We all want to stop criminals from terrorising our communities, whether they're domestic abusers or shoplifters targeting our high streets. Live facial recognition is being rolled out by our police forces, including on Sutton High Street in my constituency, but we cannot ignore the risks this technology presents. Facial recognition systems are most likely to misidentify black people and women, doing nothing to stop crime and further eroding trust in our police. Will the Minister introduce clear regulation and oversight of live facial recognition like the EU passed last April?
Well, this is another area where this new incoming Labour government is having to look at powers or things that were brought in by the previous government. Now, live facial recognition can have very positive effects, but we do need to look at whether we need a framework around it. That's why I'll be hosting a series of roundtables before Christmas to discuss with stakeholders the way forward on this technology.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Audit Office recently raised serious concerns about the previous government's decision to buy poor quality, expensive and contaminated asylum accommodation at North Eye. What steps is the department taking to ensure that asylum accommodation is fit for purpose and value for money?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. What was found by the National Audit Office in their report was not just an appalling process of decision-making by members of the previous government, but a grotesque waste of £15 million of taxpayers' money, just like the waste of £60 million at RAF Scampton. In contrast, the new government is determined to cut asylum accommodation costs by stepping up decision-making, reducing the backlog and increasing returns.
So backbenchers who don't get in.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Transnational repression by Iran, China, Russia, unfriendly nations continues writ large on diaspora populations in this country. So what is the government's strategy on transnational repression, and will she reintroduce the last government's Defending Democracy Task Force to monitor incidents?
It's a good point. The Democracy Task Force is working very closely to look at the threats that the Honourable Gentleman has raised, and we'll have more to say about it shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Home Secretary would agree with me that good government is transparent government. I've been told by her department in response to a written question that the number of crimes committed by illegal migrants is not available through published statistics. I'm sure that the Home Office does hold the data, so would the Minister today commit to publishing that information in full?
Here.
Mr. Speaker, there's a huge statistical drop of immigration-related national statistics coming at the end of this week.
Jake Richards.
Speaker, two brave women from Maltby came to my most recent surgery. Each told me about horrific physical and emotional abuse they had suffered at the hands of their ex-partners. In their case, non-molestation orders had been, they told me, ignored by the police, and this, from my professional experience prior to coming to the bar, is far from uncommon. What steps will the government take to ensure any relevant court orders are given due force?
The honourable member makes a very important point, and there is a serious problem about injunctions, non-molestation orders and protection orders not being treated properly. That is why we're introducing Raneem's law, including stronger protection orders and specialists in 999 control rooms.
Chelmsford's allocation of dispersal accommodation for asylum seekers is for over 120 beds, but the number found to date is around 1/10 of this due to the high demand and cost of private rented accommodation in the district. What extra support can the Minister offer to councils facing the increasing cost of housing asylum seekers?
Mr. Speaker, we are trying to cooperate much more with local authorities so that we can deal with the issues here, but in the end, the way to deal with this is to get the backlog down, get people out of high price accommodation so that we can integrate them if they're granted asylum.
Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have met with a number of British Palestinian families who are trying to reunite with their families in Gaza. Part of the entry clearance process requires biometrics to be undertaken. There is no visa centre in Gaza and they are unable to leave due to the closure of the Rafah crossing. Will the Home Secretary or the Minister Please indicate whether they are willing to waiver temporary biometrics so that people can undertake the entry clearance process.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. The death and destruction in Gaza is intolerable, and indeed Palestinians who wish to join family members in the UK must do so via the range of existing routes that are available. If she has a specific matter that she wishes to raise with me, I'd be very happy to meet her about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister tell this House what steps she is taking to tackle crime in rural areas, please?
As I said earlier in one of my answers, I've met with the Agricultural Equipment Association to discuss the implementation of the secondary legislation that's required around theft of agricultural equipment. And I've also having meetings with the rural crime units to discuss some of the specifics, but the neighbourhood policing guarantee applies in rural areas just as much as in urban areas, which is important.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Tracy has set up the organisation Changes Are Made in memory of her grandson, Cameron Hamilton, who was fatally stabbed in Bournemouth Town Centre last year. Tracy believes deeply in the power of education and positive activities to tackle knife crime and is campaigning for a youth hub in our constituency. Can the Home Secretary update us on the progress made to rolling out a network of youth hubs, and will she support Tracy's campaign?
Can I pay tribute to her constituent Tracy for the campaigning and also in memory of Cameron. Too many young lives are being lost. That is why we are setting up the Young Futures programme with youth hubs but also prevention partnerships to work across the country.
Julia Lopez.
Mr. Speaker, in recent weeks, channel crossings have been far higher than the Home Office expected, and that's why we've seen ministers rapidly approving new asylum hotels. We're told this situation is temporary because asylum claims are apparently now being processed faster, moving people through accommodation faster too. What reassurances can the Minister give my constituents that the faster processing of asylum claims with no deterrent in the system will not simply act as a massive incentive for more people to come here on small boats?
I have to tell the honourable member that unfortunately before the last election the previous government cut asylum decision making by 75% in the run up to the election, took away caseworkers, and that is why the backlog was soaring. We have now put caseworkers back into place so that we can start clearing the backlog because the asylum hotels are costing the taxpayer huge amounts of money.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Disabled women are almost 3 times more likely to experience domestic abuse and almost twice as likely to report sexual violence. So does my honourable friend, the Home Secretary, agree with me that it's not only important that her department but also the police work with disabled women-led organisations to understand how this intersects with gender-based violence and the double whammy that affects disabled women?
The honourable lady is absolutely right, and I pay tribute to Stay Safe East, for example, one of very few specialist disability and domestic abuse charities. But without by and for services, we simply would not be serving most of the women in our country who need support.
Final question, Peter Bamford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report today shows that 60,000 hours are taken up each year investigating non-crime hate incidents. Does the Minister agree with me that confidence in the police could be restored if they prioritise their time and resources to investigating actual crime than hurt feelings?
This government has made very clear what our priorities are around safer streets and where the focus should be for policing around halving knife crime, halving violence against women and girls over the next decade. The Home Secretary has also been very clear that a common sense approach must be taken with non-hate crime incidents, and we will work with the Inspectorate and the College of Policing on this matter.
Right, that completes questions.